I'm so excited to be here to share my passion for accessibility and inclusive design. And I'm also excited to learn from my fellow presenters. I'm coming to you from the beautiful, tiny state of Rhode Island, which is currently being dumped on by a ton of rain. So we're kind of getting our boats ready to go out for a ride. It's really hard to follow my friend and colleague Nicole Toile, who has been a mentor of mine and encouraged me actually to obtain my own CPAC certification after taking her amazing online content, making online content accessible for all course. So just a little bit of a plug for you, Nicole. Um, I'm really excited to share and learn, and I think you're going to enjoy this. This is not as technical as Nicole's presentation one was. Just a little bit about this presentation. It was originally developed and presented for Faculty Development Day at New England Institute of Technology, which was a few weeks ago, where the audience was a full-time and adjunct faculty, full-time and adjunct faculty members. I want to acknowledge that there are probably not many new concepts in today's session. As instructional designers and accessibility professionals, you've likely spent years advocating for many of the practices that we're going to discuss. But if you're an instructional designer for higher education, the information I present will be something you can definitely use. If you're not, guess what? It's something that you'll be able to use as well. What's interesting to me about this topic isn't whether these strategies work, because the research is clear and our professional experience reinforces it every day. The more interesting question is, if these practices are so effective, why do they remain some of the hardest to implement consistently across courses, programs, and institutions? So that's something we'll be thinking about as we're looking at these things. And as I move through some of these examples, I'd invite you to first think about them through two lenses. First, where do you still see the greatest gaps between what we know and what we do? And second, what can we learn from how these same principles show up outside of education? When you look closely, the strategies we're talking about today aren't just instructional design strategies, they're actually principles of human-centered design. So we're kind of taking a step back from the AI. We're looking at human-centered design. We see them in effective onboarding programs, successful change management initiatives, well-run meetings, high-performing teams, user experience design, and actually strong leadership practices. So whether we're designing a course, facilitating a meeting, onboarding a new employee, leading an organization, we're ultimately trying to answer the same questions. How do we reduce confusion? How do we make expectations clear? How do we create meaningful feedback loops? And how do we help people feel like they're connected and supported? So while the examples I share today come from teaching and learning in higher education, I'd encourage us to think beyond that and consider the broader principles for helping humans navigate complex environments successfully. So thinking about your work, what challenge do you encounter more often? Accessibility barriers, technology barriers, or barriers related to clarity, consistency, communication, and connection? I'm going to give you a lot of these kind of thought prompts along the way, and you can feel free to put things into the chat if you want to, or we can talk about them after, or just keep them to yourself. Up to you. So today we're going to answer this question. How do we make learning feel less like a transaction and more like a transformational experience? And what we're going to explore are research-based practices that improve online and on-ground course quality while centering the student experience, and with strategies to increase instructor presence, build community, reduce cognitive load, and design meaningful assessments. You're also going to find that the most effective practices in education are actually principles, again, of human-centered design that apply wherever people learn, work, collaborate, and grow. So I posed this next question to the faculty who were in the faculty development day that I presented at a few weeks ago. And I said, why do you think that student experience matters? And I got a couple of different ideas, and I want to summarize it like this. Because learning is not just about delivering content. It's about creating an environment where students feel supported, challenged, and connected. Delivering online content is easy. It's just copy paste into Canvas or whatever LMS you're using. But what is the result? You're just spouting out information to them. But when students feel seen, valued, and capable, they're more likely to stay engaged, persist through challenges, and take ownership of their learning. This is especially true in online and hybrid environments where feelings of isolation, confusion, disconnection, that can derail progress pretty quickly. Student experience shapes everything from motivation and academic success to how students perceive themselves as learners. And by intentionally designing for clarity, inclusivity, and connection, we're not just improving the outcomes, we're helping them build confidence, resilience, and a lasting sense of belonging in their educational journey. So, true to form, we're going to actually talk about some learning outcomes. And these are that we're going to identify best practices in online and on-ground course design and delivery that enhance student experience. We're going to describe strategies to increase student engagement, connection, and motivation. And of course, we're going to apply inclusive design principles or universal design for learning to support diverse learners. Now, one thing that I want to point out, notice that I didn't say objectives. So many times we say what the learning objectives for this course are. I also didn't use the verbs understand or know. An outcome is an action or something that you can measure, and that shows knowledge or understanding. So you'll be able to identify, describe, and apply the things that you learned today. So these are your outcomes. And throughout the rest of my time as I'm presenting this to you, I'm going to give you 7 different concepts to think about to enhance learning with some tips attached to each one. Now, a little disclaimer. I've packed the slides with a lot of information, which in itself can be a problem with cognitive load and accessibility. So I will not be reading everything on the slides. That would be death by PowerPoint, and I'm completely against that. For this reason, I do have a handout that I will link to you after I'm done that you can take time to review on your own, and it will have everything that I'm going over in this presentation. So the first topic is around designing for connection. And the goal is to foster connection, trust, and psychological safety by making the experience feel personal, relational, and student-centered. And let's start with some of these strategies. And again, we're humanizing the experience in the classroom. And as I'm quickly going through these ideas, think about how they would apply outside of an educational environment. The first one is to start with a warm welcome. So some things that instructors could do. They could record a short instructor introduction that shows their personality and style, include a start here page with a welcome message. Of course, the course expectations would go there, where to go for help, and then post a welcome discussion for students to introduce themselves with a photo, a fun fact, and I say dreaded fun fact because we know how everybody loves that, or maybe a goal for the course. Could build instructor presence by sending weekly announcements or wrap-up messages using video or audio feedback, even if it's an on-ground course. Share relevant personal or professional anecdotes to make the content relatable. Fostering peer-to-peer interaction is important. Create community building activities early in the course, so maybe a scavenger hunt where you're getting to know your peers. Use collaborative tools like Google Docs, breakout rooms, and peer reviews. Or host optional virtual office hours, coffee chats, or Q&A sessions using Zoom or Teams. And this can be done both in online or hybrid courses as well as on-ground courses. Using inclusive or supportive language is really important. The things that you need to be careful of is to make sure that you acknowledge and honor diversity, use person first or identity first language, be supportive, not patronizing, use gender neutral and inclusive examples, and then normalize, this is the biggest one, normalize asking for help. Say that I'm here to support you. Why is this so important? It really boils down to being a good human. If you want your students to learn, they have to feel like they belong. In an online environment, students can't rely on nonverbal cues like facial expressions, tone, body language. So the language you use carries even more weight. And then the last thing to humanize the experience is to always acknowledge the human behind the student. Include check-in or pulse surveys. How are you doing this week? Accept assignments in multiple formats if possible, and be flexible when students face life circumstances and offer grace within reason. When I used to teach at New England Tech, this was about 20 years ago, I found it, I joke about this, I found it quite interesting about how many grandmothers would pass away around midterms or finals or something like that. But there is real life that happens with students, as you know. So make sure that you are flexible. You are flexible with them. Ask your students, and this is a big one, ask your students, what do you need from this course to feel connected? They'll definitely tell you, especially if they feel comfortable with you. So think about a time when you felt genuinely connected to a course, a team, an organization, or a leader. What specific actions helped create that sense of connection? Was it the leader's personality? Was it the way that they approached things? These are some of the things that you can actually apply to your work if you're in the corporate world. If connection, trust, and belonging influence engagement in classrooms, workplaces, and communities alike, why do we treat them as a nice to have rather than fundamental design considerations? Another thing to think about. So the next topic is engaging every learner. The goal of this is to create active and inclusive learning, designing flexible, interactive, and inclusive learning experiences that support their student agency, accommodate different needs, and foster deeper engagement. So I've got a few suggestions up here. There's a lot, again, on this slide. You will have this information in a handout, so I'm not going to, again, read everything, but I'll go through them and give a few examples. The first thing is applying universal design for learning principles, multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. Quickly, if you're not familiar with these, I think most of you probably are, but multiple means of engagement means that you offer choices in how students participate. A simple example could be offering transcripts of a recorded lecture. Students could either watch, read, or do both. Multiple means of representation means you present information in different formats using a mix of video, audio, infographics, text, even if you're on ground. And multiple means of action and expression means that students demonstrate understanding in various ways. For example, a final project could be a video, podcast, paper, or digital poster. And I want to give a quick personal example for this. My son actually is in the middle of his finals for his he's going to school for aviation maintenance, and he's at the very end. Graduates in just a couple of weeks, which is really exciting. But he had an experience with an instructor where he was given an exam about it was about rotors, so it's helicopter based. And he was given an exam and was unable to pass it. He's a very hands-on person, as most mechanics, maintenance technicians are. And even though he knew the stuff on the exam, for some reason he just couldn't translate between what he knew and putting it on paper. So his instructor took him, after not passing it actually twice, his instructor took him out to the hangar and said, okay, now we're going to take the exam for real, and put him in front of the helicopter, in front of the engine, in front of the rotors, and went through the questions, and he was able to pass with flying colors because he could see it in front of him. And this is a perfect example of multiple means of action and expression. And I'm grateful that that instructor saw enough in my son to know that he knew what he was doing. He just needed a different way to explain and express what he knew. The next thing on here is to design for participation, not just consumption. So include interactive elements. Replace static lectures with active learning prompts. So you could do things like pause and reflect on this, or what surprised you about this story, or try this practice quiz before you continue. And you can do this on ground as well. If you can just kind of stop and just say, okay, pop quiz, let's just low stakes pop quiz, obviously. And actually that brings us to the next thing, where leverage low stakes, high frequency assessments, just retrieval practice in frequent informal opportunities to apply learning, and that just builds confidence. Again, something that can be done online or on ground. Another idea here is to provide student choice. So topics, tools, and the option to work in partners or working solo. I know you probably remember the dreaded group project. You know, sometimes that's not necessarily. Give students a choice. And as far as topics, you could give them a choice of 3 topics that relate to the overall content to explore in a particular week. And again, tools, let them use PowerPoint, Canva, or video to present. Another thing that's really important is to build inclusive participation norms. Set the tone that all voices matter. Use breakout rooms or groups with roles. We do this in corporate America a lot too, corporate America or corporate everywhere. Where you assign a note taker, a presenter, a timekeeper to ensure that there's an equitable involvement in those breakout rooms. Also offer asynchronous options for participation. So remember that all interactions should always enhance learning and support learning outcomes. Don't just give them busy work. Don't just give students busy work because that's not going to enhance what they're putting in their brains. Some questions to think about here is where do you see environments that are designed for where do you see environments that are designed for a single average user, learner, or employee? And how might those experiences improve if we design for greater flexibility and choice? Now, I work for a very large corporation, global corporation, and sometimes there's not a lot of flexibility. But if we look hard enough, you can definitely find things. The other thing to think about is when participation is low, do we tend to view it as a motivational problem? Or do we stop to consider whether the experience was designed in a way that invited participation from a diverse group of people? Again, some little bit of feedback for yourself. Reflection and feedback. Speaking of feedback, that's the next topic. So you want to make sure that assessments are meaningful, and the goal is to provide timely, specific, and growth-oriented feedback that supports student learning, builds confidence, and of course promotes continuous improvement. So we've got a few ideas here. The first thing is to make it timely and frequent. And I know for myself, no matter what I'm doing, I thrive on feedback. If I don't get timely feedback, then it's very difficult to apply it. It's most effective when students receive it while they still have an opportunity to apply it. Frequent feedback helps students adjust their learning strategies, correct any misconceptions, and stay engaged. In face-to-face courses, this might look like brief check-ins, in-class polling, formative assessments, or quick comments during activities, not just feedback on major assignments. Be specific and actionable with your feedback. Students need more than a score or general comment. They need to understand exactly what they did well and what they can improve. And actionable feedback gives them the clear next steps that they need that they can immediately apply. And here's a way you can do this. Use a growth-oriented structure. So talk about what they did well, what to work on next, and how to get there with suggestions along the way. Something that might be a little bit different is you could provide audio or video feedback. Again, humanizing the experience, especially in an online world. Student reflection. Feedback only impacts learning if students engage with it. So ask students to reflect themselves on what they're on their work and provide their own feedback. It helps students become more self-aware, more self-directed learners. And the last one is peer feedback. So it doesn't have to come exclusively from the instructor. Structured peer review and self-assessment activities help students develop critical thinking, communication, and evaluation skills. And of course, the students will take a more active role in the learning process. So effective feedback is an important aspect of inclusive design because it provides multiple opportunities for students to learn, improve, and demonstrate growth. So when you're clear, supportive, and actionable, it helps all learners. And so something to think about is how does feedback make a difference for you? As I mentioned, I thrive on feedback. I want the good, bad, the ugly, because I don't want to be stuck in a place where I'm not learning and I'm not growing and I'm not contributing appropriately. Some other things to think about is in your own work, which of these feedback practices do we consistently recommend for learning environments, but struggle to experience ourselves in a workplace setting? I'm sure we all have examples of different things that we struggle with. How different would performance reviews, project debriefs, or team coaching look if they were designed using the same feedback principles we advocate for students? Again, something that we can apply. Okay, the next topic, clarity is kindness. Streamlining course design for cognitive ease. And clarity is kindness for everything, not just designing courses, not just learning. It's all about communication because it reduces cognitive load by making your course structure, expectations, and instructions easy to follow. And this is one of the most impactful, yet often overlooked elements of effective teaching. When a course is clear and well organized, students feel confident, focused, and less overwhelmed. So here's a bunch of ideas for you really quickly. Consistency helps students know where to find information and what to expect each week. When students don't have to spend energy navigating the course, they can focus more fully on learning. And this is also important in face-to-face courses. When students have a structured organization to go back to, it's very easy for them to learn compared to if they have to figure things out every single week. Breaking information into smaller sections makes it easier to process and retain. We like to use the word chunking in instructional design. Rather than overwhelming students with a large amount of information, this supports attention, comprehension, and memory. And in-person lectures can benefit from the same approach, using shorter segments, activities, or discussion breaks. Clear student-centered instructions. Students should not have to guess what they're being asked to do. Clear, direct instructions reduce confusion and help all learners engage successfully. This is especially helpful for multilingual learners, first-generation students, freshmen, anyone who may be unfamiliar with academic expectations. Minimizing unnecessary tech or navigation complexity. Your goal should be to make important information easy to find and understand in your course. And of course, too much text can overly complicate or become a barrier to learning, whether they're looking at a syllabus, a presentation, or an online course space. It just improves accessibility overall. Be transparent with expectations. When they're clearly communicated, students can better manage their time, monitor their progress. Are you seeing a theme here? You probably are. One thing that's really important, especially in higher education, are rubrics. Make sure that your students know exactly what you're going to be looking for when you're grading their assignments. Those rubrics are key. And then the last thing is an orientation resource that helps provide students with a roadmap for the course, helping them to understand where to find things, how the content is organized, where they can go for support, and so on. And these practices are examples of inclusive design because they remove the unnecessary barriers before students encounter them. Rather than creating accommodations later, this is the whole idea of accessibility. We're taking away the barriers first. If you are a first time, now this is hypothetically if you don't teach, but if you're designing for someone who does, if you are a first time student in your course, what might confuse or frustrate you? And you can actually replace student with employee or team member, and take a look at your course. What would frustrate someone? Maybe it's the navigation. Maybe the navigation changes from page to page. You're clicking at the top left or you're clicking at the bottom right. If we did replace student with employee or team member, where do you see the greatest need for more clarity, consistency, and transparency? How many of these strategies would improve not just a course, but a meeting, an onboarding process, a SharePoint site, or organizational communication? Next topic. Okay. Authentic learning. So the goal of making coursework matter and making it authentic is to design learning activities that are meaningful, relevant, and reflective of real-world tasks and challenges. And this is especially important for higher education. So there's a lot of stuff on this slide. I am not going to talk about all of them, but there are a couple of things here, designing, again, for real-world career relevant assignments, using scenarios and simulation, encouraging reflection, metacognition. Again, all of this will be available in the handout. But I do want to ask a couple of questions. Where do you see opportunities outside of higher education to move from knowledge acquisition to authentic application? Maybe in onboarding, maybe professional development, organizational change. Think about the most meaningful learning experience you've had as a professional. Was it something you were told or something you had to do, solve, create, or reflect on? And then how often do our courses, trainings, workplace development programs ask people to demonstrate the kinds of thinking and problem solving they'll actually need in the real world? I have a Post-it note right here on my monitor that says, am I teaching capabilities or am I just sharing information? There's a difference. If we're just throwing information at people, there's not a lot of learning that's happening. Okay, couple more, and then we'll have some time for questions or discussion. From passive to purposeful, rethinking lecture in online spaces. And a lot of these, again, are geared towards online learning, but don't tune out because some can be applied on-ground learning as well. And the goal is to move beyond static content delivery, meaning long lectures or PDFs that someone has to read, to active, engaging learning that prompts students to think, apply, and reflect. And here are a couple of strategies. The first one is to break up long lectures into what we call microlearning, 5 to 10 minute videos that cover one concept at a time that are clearly titled. And here's a big one, and this was a big takeaway when I presented this a couple of weeks ago. Include a what to watch for statement to guide their attention in each video, either included at the very beginning or included as part of the description of the video. Another example is to embed questions and reflection prompts in the content. Turn watching into thinking by inserting the prompts. And an example is pause to write a one-sentence summary and then put it on the discussion board. Instructors could also flip the model, provide instructional content, videos, and what they have to read before class or activity time, and then use class time and discussion boards or assignments for application, synthesis, or debate. Learn by doing exercises. So replace passive consumption with interactive tasks, matching, or scenario-based challenges. Build a case or project walkthroughs. Include retrieval practice, and we mentioned this before, but frequent low-stakes quizzes or polls to boost memory and focus. And then templates and scaffolds. And as instructional designers, you'll know the term scaffolding. This just provide frameworks that guide students through a task, give them guided notes, give them sample project outlines, give them expert examples, fill in the gap activity sheets. How do we know when someone is truly engaged with content versus simply taking it all in? So think about this. Where do you see passive information delivery happening? Most often outside of courses, and what might it look like to redesign it for active engagement? If active engagement is critical for learning, why do so many experiences in higher education and the workplace still ask people primarily to learn primarily by watching, listening, and reading? That's a big question. That's pretty much what a lot of the things that are created do. So it's something to consider. All right. Last little section. Presence, not perfection. Instructor strategies that make a difference. And the goal here is to remember that consistency is what makes the most impact with students. Acknowledge that you're not perfect, but that you're trying. And here are a few strategies. And I want to give a shout out to my master's program in instructional design at Quinnipiac University. These ideas for instructor presence came from my experience there. It was such a great experience. Again, another shout out, personal shout out. The first one is to be visible and predictable. Instructor presence starts with showing up consistently. Students benefit when they know when and how they can expect communication, feedback, and support. Regular announcements, weekly updates, predictable response times. They all help to build trust. In face-to-face courses, this might look like the beginning of class with a brief overview, maintaining consistent office hours, or following established classroom routines. The next one is to use your voice and your face. Students are more likely to feel connected to a course when they can see and hear the instructor. And so this might apply mostly to online, but on-ground courses can also do this. Short video or audio updates can communicate enthusiasm, clarify expectations, present a sense of connection. Even in in-person courses, these brief videos can help reinforce key concepts or provide guidance for assignments or something like that. Engage personally on discussion boards. Discussion boards are often more effective when instructors actively participate rather than simply monitor them. Commenting on student ideas, asking follow-up questions, and recognizing insightful contributions help create a stronger learning community. And in face-to-face courses, similar engagement occurs through conversations before class, small group interactions, and responding thoughtfully to student comments during discussion. Another thing for instructor presence that's really important is to acknowledge struggles and celebrate wins. Students are more likely to engage when they feel seen as individuals, as we've mentioned before. Recognizing common challenges, offering encouragement, and celebrating milestones can foster belonging and motivation. A simple acknowledgement that a difficult assignment requires extra effort or highlighting class accomplishments can really strengthen the instructor-student relationship. Low barrier contact. Students might hesitate to ask for help if communication feels really formal or intimidating. Provide multiple ways to connect, such as office hours, discussion forums, quick check-ins, or anonymous question forums. It just makes support more accessible and helps to build that relationship. And this just gives students more flexibility at different comfort levels. Again, very important, model inclusive and respectful behavior because instructors set the tone for the learning environment using inclusive language, as we mentioned before, demonstrating diverse perspectives, establishing clear expectations for interaction. It helps create a classroom culture where students feel valued and safe participating. And students will take a cue from instructors' behavior, and that'll determine how they engage with one another. Instructor presence is a key component of inclusive design because it helps students feel connected. When instructors are visible, approachable, and intentional in their interactions, they reduce feelings of isolation and uncertainty. And this is especially important in online courses. Students are more likely to engage with a course when they know there's a real responsive human behind it. So to bring this back to the workplace, how many of the characteristics of strong instructor presence are also characteristics of effective leadership? What is the workplace equivalent of students feeling that nobody is really there? This is a hard question to answer, especially in a distributed workforce. I work from home. I'm alone all day, though I am talking to people all the time. But it can be quite lonely if we're not careful about that. So just a couple more things to think about. So when I presented this information to the faculty at New England Tech, I did give them some homework. Of course, you could take these and apply them to your own work as well. The homework for today is to evaluate the clarity and effectiveness of your current course structure and identify areas of improvement. And then develop an action plan to implement at least one new instructional strategy or tool in your own course. And one thing that I mentioned to these instructors was that if they changed one thing every time they taught their course, the improvements would compound and it would be a nice change over time. They don't have to jump in and change everything all at once. And there are a lot of instructors and faculty who teach the same course every single term. So, making 4 changes a year would make a big difference. So in conclusion, I have a Post-it note on my monitor, another one. I have a few, but this one says, it's not up to me to determine what someone is going to learn. It is up to me to remove the barriers to learning. Human-centered design does just that. It creates an environment where people are more likely to learn. So just do it. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to present today. I hope that you found the information helpful and thought-provoking. I'm going to drop a link in just a second to the handout that I promised in the chat for you to download for your reference. In the meantime, I'll turn the time back over to Lewis for any questions. And feel free to connect. I'll drop my LinkedIn profile there as well. And feel free to connect with me.
Excellent. Marni, thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me just
It's,
drop these in here really quickly so that you guys
yeah.
have them.
Let's see. Have any questions, everybody? You can either drop them into chat or into the QA area. Wait, let's see
Oh, you
here.
want a photo of my Post-it with my really bad handwriting? Let me type that in here right now. I'll type it in for you.
Awesome. I'm taking a look. Don't have any questions yet. Just your
Let
photo request.
me just make sure I typed it and gave you a nice, no typos or anything like that. There
Are
we
you going to
go.
make your presentation available at all?
It's actually the handout itself is everything that's on the presentation.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Let me stop sharing this. and then we can, it includes my notes um, as well as everything that was on the screen.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's see. I'm seeing just lots of thank yous. Yeah, it doesn't look like we have any questions. Yeah.
Well, like I mentioned, these are concepts that instructional designers already know about, so maybe
Mhm.
it's a good review. But I thought it was interesting when I was looking at it and putting it together for higher education. I thought there's a lot of application that could be used also in in the workforce in the corporate world, and so I hopefully brought that out to you as well.
Do have a couple questions that have come in. Here's one from Jennifer Peters.
Okay.
What were some of your techniques for helping faculty to understand how important the learner-centered focus?
That's a really good question because, Faculty Development Day is a required activity of all of the faculty every year. And what I did as I was presenting, and I didn't give as many stories in this presentation, but I told a lot of stories around around my kids because both of my kids are in college right now, and some of their experiences with things that were good and things that were not so good. So I think bringing stories into it is a huge is something that's huge because people connect with stories emotionally. I also made them raise their hands to because New England Tech uses Canvas as their learning management system. I made them raise their hands if the only time they use Canvas was just to drop the syllabus in there. And for most on-ground course faculty, that's all they use it for.
Hmm,
And so I tried to give them a lot of examples of way that they could use it to bring more, even though it's technology, to bring more interaction and things to the course as well.
interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
great. And then here's another question. This one is from Sasa Stoic Ito. Sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Question is, Marnie, how do you deal with resistance or when folks are doing, in quotes, things only for ADA compliance versus creating inclusive content overall?
Wow, that's a loaded question. The thing that I find, I go back to stories a lot. Um, I was talking with some people yesterday about this is in church actually about when someone comes up to the podium to make sure that they state their name for the purpose of making sure that people in the audience who might be visually impaired would know who is speaking. And so I do tell a lot of stories around accessibility so that people understand that it's not just a compliance thing, it's an everyday thing. One story that I like to tell a lot is that one fact is that we're all only temporarily abled. I mean, Lewis, you and I both wear eyeglasses. Guess what? We have visual impairments because we have, and most people do, but people don't see it that way. And so when I tell these stories around how, you know what, you could walk out your door and something could happen and your life is completely changed, whether it be situational or temporary or whatever, disability is going to happen to everyone at some point or another. And so when you design for everyone in mind, I was attending the Disability In conference last week, and one of the things they talked about, they mentioned a lot, design for the edges, and then it includes everyone. When you design that way, then everybody's included, and we all have examples of that, captions and all that kind of thing. We have lots of examples of how that helps. But again, it's all about the stories.
Nice.
Yeah.
That conference that you're referencing, do they have any recordings or anything? I mean, can it be used as a resource at all?
That's a good question. I have access to it because my company is in partnership with Disability In, so I
Hmm.
don't know, but if you go to disabilityin.org, they have a lot of resources. And I don't know how much of the conference that they put out, but they do a lot of webinars that are free, and all of that. So definitely check that out.
Okay, I'm gonna just post the link in
Oh, you know
chat.
what? Yeah, could you post? Oh, you're right. I didn't send it to everybody. That is my, let me get the link for my, thank you for calling that out.
Oh,
Let me get the
sorry.
link
Yeah, I gave wrong
for
information.
the, no, let me get the link for the, there we go. Everyone. Okay, that helps. And then here is my LinkedIn if you want to connect as well. Please let me know if you have any problems getting to that handout.